You look at us, we're white, and of our 6 kids, I have 2 children who are white, 1 is brown, 3 are black. Am I supposed to look at my family as a mixture of people and children and treat some of them as inherently racist and others of my children as part of a permanently oppressed class? I mean, is that really what I ought to be teaching my own children?
According to critical race theory, yes. And their reasoning kind of goes like this.
Dinesh, you had mentioned in just a moment ago critical race theory. For a lot of people, this is starting to become a household phrase. Can you help us understand what is CRT, critical race theory?
Critical race theory arose out of an earlier movement that was simply called critical theory. Now, who are the champions of critical theory? By and large, these were leftist or Marxist theoreticians, scholars, who were writing in the early to mid part of the 20th century. So Marx thought that basically the world is divided into 2 kinds of people, the working class, and these are the people who are oppressed, and the capitalist class, and those are the people who do the oppressing. And so for Marx, class was kind of the lever to drive a wedge through society, to create revolutionary resentment, and ultimately to cause a revolution itself. So critical race theory takes this whole framework on board, it embraces it, it just adds one element. It takes the idea of class and replaces it with the idea of race.
The whole point, though, of critical race theory is allegedly to help us to actually heal racial wounds and promote racial reconciliation. Is it going to do that?
Absolutely not. And I think that if you probe the critical race theory guys, they're generally honest enough to say that that is not their goal. This was, in fact, Martin Luther King's goal. What you're describing, Martin Luther King, a whole generation ago, used the phrase the beloved community. And Martin Luther King's idea was really very simple. And that is that the line between good and evil does not run between the races. It kind of runs through every human heart. And so there are good people in all groups. And also justice and racism is something that can be outlawed by outlawing it on the individual level. And by that, I mean, we have an individual right to be judged, as King himself said, on the content of our character. By the way, notice that King doesn't just say merit. He says the content of our character, which is a bigger idea than merit. But if you present this idea right now to any critical race theory guy, they'll start laughing sarcastically. They will say things like, well, that's the only line from Martin Luther King that you know and you seem to keep quoting. So what they do, they want to get away from that. The idea of color blindness, of treating people as individuals, this is not what they are all about. Basically, what they're all about is italicizing or emphasizing race for every minority group except for whites. So they want every ethnic group to feel excited and proud of their heritage and to make demands based upon it, but they want whites to be disgusted, shamed, and humiliated over their own heritage. And they want whites, it's not even that you can say, well, okay, you know what, I understand a lot of bad things were done by white people, and I'm going to repudiate those things. And therefore, can I gain some sort of immunity because I don't want to be part of all that? And the answer is no, you can't. You can't gain any immunity. Why? Because you're white. And so even though you may not intend to be a racist, you are nevertheless a beneficiary of what, and we've all heard this phrase these days, white privilege. And so essentially what you have here is a kind of never-ending wedge between the races. And far from getting away from race, which I think was always the goal of liberals.
Wow, it's so interesting. And now I am a father of 6. My wife and I, obviously, you look at us, we're white. And of our 6 kids, I have 2 children who are white. 1 is brown, 3 are black. And so it baffles me. Am I supposed to look at my family as a mixture of people and children and treat some of them as inherently racist and others of my children as part of a permanently oppressed class? I mean, is that really what I ought to be teaching my own children?
According to critical race theory, yes. And their reasoning kind of goes like this. Their reasoning is that your black children are going to be black in a society defined by white privilege. So no matter what you teach them, in fact, no matter what kind of benefits you give them, it doesn't even matter if they're multimillionaires. The argument goes they could still be pulled over by a cop because they're black. Driving while black is one of the kind of favored phrases of the CRT or critical race theory movement. So their argument is that you cannot get away from these things, and no amount of kind of wholesomeness, no amount of your black kids and brown kids and white kids growing up together can heal these wounds. In some ways, it's a very despairing philosophy, but at the same time, it's also a racket. And what I mean by that is that these advocates of critical race theory they all view race as a business. In a weird way, if you say to them, would you be happy if racism were to sort of disappear overnight? We'd never have another ounce of racism. They'd be terrified, because it's kind of like telling a car salesman, would you be happy if people stopped driving cars?
That's a whole paradigm shifter, and I think that, I know that, in the circles of people that I talk to, and as I look around and travel the nation, nobody wants to be called a racist. Everyone's so afraid that they're going to be viewed as some sort of a bigot that they just want to backpedal and virtue signal and make sure that no one sees them that way. Are you saying that maybe we don't actually need an emergency solution to deep systemic racial problems, but we're actually witnessing a very clever tool that is straight out of a Marxist playbook that's designed to divide and weaken us? I mean, that sounds sinister. And if that's true, why in the world would anyone want to divide us as a nation? The whole point is we want to be united.
Well, that is exactly what I'm saying, and I think I can prove the point pretty decisively. So you just correctly described, I would say 99% of white people when you said nobody wants to be considered a racist. Now, think about this for a minute. What you're really saying is that deep down, inwardly, every white person pretty much rejects the code of racism. And therefore, if you accuse them of being a racist, they become very angry and defensive, not only because they don't want to be seen as a racist by society, but they don't want to see themselves as a racist. In other words, they have an inner moral code that rejects racism. Now, quite honestly, Kirk, if somebody were truly a racist, they would be very proud if you accused them of being that.
That's right, and I've heard them say so.
Imagine if you accused me of being Indian. You won't get angry denials from me. I'd be like, sure, yeah, I'm Indian. You're right.
I'll
take that as a compliment. So real racists are not ashamed of bebeing racist. It's only people who are not racist who can be played with the accusation of racism, because only non-racists respond by going, this is like Dracula before the cross. They don't want the accusation of racism because they really aren't racist. That is
such a great point. Man, I want to rewind this and go back and listen to this. I can't wait to do that with my wife and my kids. I think that with all of these phrases that are becoming household talking points in our homes, and all these acronyms that we're hearing, I wonder why we, as members of the family of faith, who have a set of values that have produced the greatest civilizations in the world, who understand that there is a God that has made us and loves us and has a plan to set us free from the shackles of sin and guilt and abuse people because of our own selfishness, why are we always on the defense? Why are we always the ones to say, oh my goodness, CRT, what is that? Here's a new acronym. Now we have BLM, or it's some series of letters that is some phrase that we're afraid of and we're trying to figure out what to do about it. I say we come up with some of our own acronyms. Why don't we have something like CFT? How about critical faith theory that all the news stations are talking about? I think George Washington might be the head of that organization. I think it was him that said it's impossible to rightly govern the nation without God and the Bible. I mean, this is just basic history. This is stuff that anyone has known, even people who were a little more irreligious. You take Benjamin Franklin, and he understood that without Christianity, without true faith, that is critical, he said, in order for us to be free, whether we're a believer or not a believer in a country like this.